There are moments in life when you realize you're not living for yourself anymore, that every breath you take, every decision you make, belongs to someone else's survival. Lila discovered this truth on a Tuesday afternoon when her father came home with papers that would sell her future to save her family's past. The Mediterranean sun was setting over their small apartment in the old quarter of the city, painting the cracked walls in shades of amber and rust, and her father couldn't look her in the eyes when he told her what he'd done. If this story moves you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from, and if you feel it was worth your time, consider becoming a member for early access to upcoming stories. Your support means everything. Lila had always known they were struggling. You don't grow up in a 3-room apartment with peeling paint and a father who works 2 jobs without understanding that money is the invisible force shaping every part of your existence. But she'd thought they were managing, surviving, holding on. She didn't know about the debts, the ones that came with men who didn't accept late payments, who measured time in threats instead of months. Her father, Mikhail, had been a businessman once, owned a small import company that brought textiles from North Africa into Europe. But bad investments, a partner who disappeared with half the capital, and a series of unfortunate circumstances had left him drowning in obligations he couldn't meet. And when you owe money to the wrong people, they don't just take your assets, they take your choices. That's how Lila found herself sitting across from her father at their small kitchen table, staring at a contract written in formal Arabic and English, with her name printed at the bottom next to a line that waited for her signature. The deal was simple, brutal, transactional. A sheikh from one of the Gulf states needed a wife, not for love, not even for companionship, but for appearance, for the satisfaction of certain traditional expectations his family placed upon him. He would pay enough to clear all of Mikhail's debts, set up the family in a proper home, ensure her younger brother could continue his studies. In exchange, Lila would become his wife for a period of no less than 2 years, living in his household, playing the role required of her. After that, if both parties agreed, she could leave with a settlement that would ensure she never had to worry about money again. It was prostitution dressed in legal language and cultural tradition, Lila thought, staring at the papers. Except it wasn't even that honest, because at least a prostitute chose her clients, set her terms, walked away when the transaction was complete. This was something else entirely, something older and darker. This was being sold. "Are you really asking me to do this?" she said quietly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Her father finally looked up, and she saw that. He'd been crying. His eyes were red, swollen, aged by shame. "I have no right to ask you anything," he whispered. "But they will kill me, Lila. And then they will come for your brother. They've made that very clear. There are no other options. I've tried everything." Lila felt something cold settle in her chest, something that felt like the death of a future she'd imagined for herself. She was 24, had just finished her degree in art history, had dreams of working in a museum, of traveling, of finding love on her own terms. She'd never been particularly romantic, never believed in fairy tales or destiny, but she'd at least believed she would have agency, would have choice. Now those dreams felt like childish fantasies. "Who is he?" she asked. "Sheikh Rashid al-Zirani," her father said, reading from a folder he'd been given. "He's 36, educated in London and Geneva, manages his family's investment portfolio. Unmarried until now. From what I'm told, he's considered quite eligible in his circles." "Why does he need to buy a wife?" Lila asked, the bitterness sharp in her voice. "If he's so eligible?" Her father hesitated. The intermediary suggested that the sheikh has particular standards. He wants someone educated, someone who can navigate both his world and Western contexts, but also someone without connections to his social circle, someone who won't bring complications. He wants control, Lila translated. He wants someone who has no power, no voice, no ability to refuse him. Her father said nothing, which was answer enough. Lila stood and walked to the small window that looked out over the narrow street below. Children were playing football, their shouts echoing off the old stone buildings. A woman was hanging laundry on a line stretched between windows. Normal life, continuing as if the world wasn't reshaping itself around impossible choices. "What happens if I say no?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Her father's silence was heavy, absolute. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Then I've failed you completely, and I'll have to live with that for whatever time I have left." It wasn't manipulation, Lila knew. It was just truth. The men her father owed didn't make empty threats. They had a reputation for following through, for making examples. If she refused, her father would die. Her brother's education would end. Her mother, already fragile from years of stress and anxiety, would collapse entirely. The family would be destroyed, and Lila would have to live knowing she could have prevented it. Some choices aren't really choices at all. They're just the illusion of agency in the face of inevitable surrender. Lila turned back to her father. "I want to meet him first," she said. "Before I sign anything, I want to meet this sheikh and look him in the eyes." Her father nodded quickly, relief and guilt warring on his face. "That can be arranged. He's in the city now, at a hotel. The intermediary said he would make time. Tomorrow." "Then," Lila said. "And I want you to understand something, Father. I will do this. I will save our family because I love you, because I love Mother and Dimitri, because I believe family is worth sacrifice." But she stepped closer, her voice dropping to something cold and certain. "Don't ever ask me to forgive you for this. Don't ever expect me to pretend this was anything other than what it is. You are selling your daughter. That's the truth we'll both have to live with." Mikhail's face crumpled, but Lila felt nothing. The numbness had already begun, the emotional distance that would allow her to survive what was coming. She walked to her small bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. There were posters there, remnants of who she'd been just hours ago. A Klimt print, a photograph of the Roman Forum, a concert ticket from a musician she'd loved. Evidence of a person who'd had preferences, tastes, dreams. That person was already fading, being replaced by whoever she would need to become to survive what came next. Lila didn't cry. Tears felt like a luxury, an indulgence for people who still had the privilege of feeling their emotions fully. Instead, she lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling, mapping out the architecture of her new reality. 2 years. That's what the contract said. 730 days of living with a stranger who'd purchased her like an asset. 730 nights of pretending to be something she wasn't. And then, if she could endure it, freedom. A life bought with her dignity. It wasn't what she'd wanted. It wasn't even close. But it was what she had. And Lila had learned long ago that survival wasn't about getting what you wanted. It was about accepting what you had and finding a way to live with it. The hotel was the kind of place Lila had only seen in magazines, all marble and gold, with doormen in uniforms that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. Her father had wanted to come with her, but she'd refused. This was something she needed to do alone, needed to face without the weight of his guilt, making everything heavier. The intermediary, a slim man named Karim, who wore an expensive suit and an expression of professional neutrality, met her in the lobby. He looked her over with the assessing gaze of someone evaluating merchandise, and Lila felt her spine straighten, her chin lift. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. "Miss Volkov," he said with a slight nod, "the Sheikh is expecting you. Please, follow me." They took a private elevator to the penthouse floor. Kareem didn't make small talk, which Lila appreciated. She didn't want pleasantries, didn't want the pretense that this was anything other than a transaction. The hallway was silent except for their footsteps on thick carpet, and when they reached the door at the end, Kareem knocked once before opening it. "The Sheikh will see you now," he said, stepping aside. Lila walked through the door into a suite that was larger than her family's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city sprawling below, the sea beyond it, the sky beginning to purple with dusk. The room was decorated with understated elegance, modern furniture mixed with what looked like genuine antiques, art on the walls that Lila recognized from her studies. And standing by the window, looking out at the view, was the man who wanted to buy her. Sheikh Rashid al-Zahrani turned when she entered, and Lila felt her breath catch despite herself. He was tall, at least 6'2", with the kind of presence that seemed to fill a room without effort. His hair was black, cut short, his face all sharp angles and strong lines. He wore a white thobe and a black bisht that draped from his shoulders with careless elegance. But it was his eyes that stopped her, dark, impossibly dark, and intense in a way that made her feel simultaneously seen and evaluated. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, and his voice was deep, accented with British education layered over Arabic roots. "Miss Volkov, thank you for coming." Lila said nothing, just held his gaze. She wouldn't make this easy for him. If he wanted to buy her, he could at least work for it. The Sheikh's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "You're angry. That's understandable. Would you like something to drink? Tea? Coffee?" "No," Lila said. "I'd like to know why a man of your obvious means needs to purchase a wife like she's a commodity." "Most women," he said calmly, "want something from me. Money, status, access, connections. They come with agendas, with families who see me as an opportunity, with expectations I have no intention of meeting. It becomes exhausting." "So you decided to buy someone instead," Lila said. "Someone with no power to refuse, no ability to have expectations. How convenient for you." The Sheikh studied her, and something shifted in his expression. "You have power," he said quietly. "You have the power to refuse. I won't force you to sign anything. If you walk out that door, the arrangement ends. Your father will have to find another solution." "But we both know there isn't one," Lila said bitterly. "The men he owes don't accept payment plans. So my choice is to sign your contract or watch my family be destroyed." "That's not power, Sheikh. That's coercion dressed in politeness." He inclined his head slightly. "You're right. I apologize. That was poorly phrased." He moved away from the window, closer to where she stood, and Lila forced herself not to step back, not to show the nervousness that thrummed under her skin. "Let me be direct," he said. "I need a wife for traditional reasons. My family, particularly my grandmother, has been pressuring me for years to marry. She's ill now, and I would like her to have peace before she dies. I have no interest in a love match, in emotional complications, in the kind of relationship that requires constant negotiation and compromise. I want someone intelligent, educated, capable of representing me in various contexts, who understands this is a business arrangement and nothing more. In exchange, I'm offering financial security, a comfortable life, and eventual freedom. It's not romance, but it's honest." "And honesty," Lila said, "is supposed to make it acceptable." The Sheikh's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm not interested in pretending this is something it isn't. I'm not a romantic man, Miss Volkov. I don't believe in love, in soulmates, in destiny. I believe in clear terms and mutual benefit. You need money to save your family. I need a wife to satisfy my family. We can help each other." And after 2 years, Lila said, after 2 years, you receive a settlement of 2 million euros and complete freedom to live your life as you choose. No obligations, no expectations, no contact unless you initiate it. The apartment in Paris that's mentioned in the contract becomes yours, fully paid. You'll have financial independence for life. Lila felt dizzy. 2 million euros. It was an incomprehensible amount, enough to ensure not just her freedom, but her family's stability forever. Enough to make the sacrifice meaningful. Why so much? She asked. You could buy a wife for far less. The Sheikh looked at her with something that might have been respect. Because I'm asking you to give up 2 years of your life, your autonomy, your freedom to choose. That has value. I won't insult you by pretending it doesn't. And because I want you to know that when you leave, you'll never have to depend on anyone again. No man will ever be able to buy your choices the way I'm buying them now. It was, Lila thought, perhaps the most honest thing anyone had said to her in this entire nightmare. She appreciated the lack of pretense, the absence of pretty lies. If she was going to sell herself, at least he wasn't trying to pretend she wasn't. What would you expect from me? She asked. During these 2 years. You would live in my home in Dubai, the Sheikh said. You would attend certain social functions with me, represent me at family gatherings, play the role of wife in public. In private, he paused, and something complex crossed his face. You would have your own rooms, your own space. I'm not interested in forcing intimacy. If anything physical develops between us, it would be by mutual agreement. Otherwise, we can maintain a professional distance. So I'd be an employee, Lila said. Not a wife. A wife in name, an employee in practice, he agreed. Is that more palatable? Lila laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. No, but it's at least clear. She walked to the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to sparkle in the gathering darkness. Her city, the place she'd grown up, the streets she knew like her own heartbeat. She'd be leaving all of this behind, trading it for a golden cage in a desert city, for a life with a man who saw her as a solution to a problem rather than a person. But her family would survive. Her brother would finish school. Her mother would have the surgery she needed. Her father would live. That had to be enough. I have conditions, Lila said, turning back to face him. The Sheikh raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. I want my family's debts cleared immediately before I sign anything. And I want them moved to a safe home, somewhere those men can't reach them. I want that in writing, protected, guaranteed. Done, the Sheikh said without hesitation. I want access to education, Lila continued. If I'm going to spend 2 years in Dubai, I want to be able to continue my studies, pursue my interests. I won't be a decorative object. You'll have access to anything you want, he said. Tutors, universities, libraries, museums. Whatever you need to continue growing as a person. And I want your word, Lila said, stepping closer to him, her voice dropping low. That you will never, never raise your hand to me. That you will never force me into anything physical. That you will treat me with basic human dignity even if you don't love me. The Sheikh's expression darkened. I'm not a monster, Miss Volkov. I don't hit women. I don't force myself on anyone. You have my word. And if you know anything about my culture, you know that word has weight. Lila searched his face, looking for deception, for hidden cruelty, for the signs of a man who would make her life hell. But what she saw was something different, something complicated. He seemed tired, almost as trapped as she was in a different kind of cage, one built by expectations and tradition rather than debt. Maybe they were both prisoners in this arrangement. Maybe that was why it might actually work. All right, she said finally. I'll sign your contract, Sheikh al-Zahrani. I'll be your wife for 2 years. I'll play whatever role you need me to play. But understand this. I'm doing this for my family, not for you. Don't expect me to pretend otherwise." "I wouldn't want you to," he said quietly. And then something unexpected happened. The Sheikh extended his hand, a gesture of equals, of partners entering an agreement, rather than owner and possession. "When we're alone," he said, "you can call me Rashid. We're going to be living together for 2 years. We might as well be civil." Lila looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it, felt the warmth of his palm against hers, the strength in his fingers. His grip was firm, but not crushing, respectful. It was, she thought, a better beginning than she'd expected, though that didn't make it good. The wedding happened 3 weeks later in a private ceremony that felt more like a business merger than a marriage. Lila wore a dress that had been selected by Rashid's staff, ivory silk with delicate beading that probably cost more than her father had earned in a year. Her family was there, her mother crying with relief and guilt, her brother awkward in a new suit, her father unable to meet her eyes. Rashid's family had not attended. He'd explained that they believed Anhino was marrying for love, that his grandmother was too frail to travel, that there would be a larger ceremony in Dubai later. Lila didn't care. She went through the motions with the same numb efficiency she'd cultivated since the night she'd agreed to this arrangement. The officiant spoke in Arabic and English, words about commitment and honor that felt hollow. And when it came time to sign the papers, Lila's hand didn't shake. She'd already made her choice. Trembling now wouldn't change anything. Rashid signed with the same calm precision he seemed to bring to everything. When it was done, when they were legally bound, he looked at her with those dark eyes and said quietly, "I'll try to make this as painless as possible." It was, Lila thought, probably the kindest thing anyone could have said in that moment. The flight to Dubai was on a private jet, another glimpse into the world she'd married into. Lila sat by the window, watching the Mediterranean disappear below them, trying not to think about how she was leaving everything she knew behind. Rashid sat across from her, working on a laptop, occasionally glancing up to check if she needed anything. She was learning, attentive without being invasive, present without being demanding. It made him harder to hate, which was inconvenient because anger was easier to carry than confusion. When they landed in Dubai, it was late evening, and the city stretched out below them like scattered diamonds on black velvet. A car was waiting, sleek and black with darkened windows, and they drove through streets that seemed to glow with wealth. Everything was newer, shinier, bigger than anything Lila had known. They arrived at a compound in one of the more exclusive areas of the city. High walls, security gates, a driveway lined with palm trees. The house itself was modern, all clean lines and glass, with traditional elements woven throughout, carved screens, geometric patterns, archways that caught the light. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost sterile, like a luxury hotel rather than a home. Lila felt her chest tighten. This was where she would live for the next 2 years, this beautiful, empty place that belonged to a stranger. Rashid must have seen something in her face, because he said, "I know it's a lot to take in. Would you like to see your rooms before anything else?" "My rooms," Lila repeated. "You said rooms, plural." He nodded. "You have a suite on the 2nd floor. Bedroom, sitting room, bathroom, a small office if you want to study. It's entirely yours. I'm in the West Wing if you need anything, but otherwise, you have complete privacy." Lila felt something ease in her chest. Privacy. Space. The ability to close a door and be alone. It was more than she'd hoped for. A woman appeared from inside the house, older, wearing traditional dress, her face kind. "This is Fatima," Rashid said. "She manages the household. If you need anything at all, she'll help you." Fatima smiled warmly and said, something in Arabic. Rashid translated. She says, "Welcome home," and that she's happy there's finally a woman in this house to bring it life. Lila managed a small smile, though home felt like the wrong word entirely. "Thank you," she said to Fatima, who nodded and gestured for her to follow. Rashid touched her arm lightly, briefly. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be easier." "I hope you're right," Lila said, and followed Fatima into the house. The suite was stunning. The bedroom had a huge bed with white linens, windows that looked out over a garden lit with subtle lighting, art on the walls that showed actual taste rather than just expense. The bathroom was marble and glass, with a tub large enough to swim in. The sitting room had comfortable furniture, bookshelves waiting to be filled, a desk positioned to catch natural light. It was perfect, beautiful, and utterly foreign. Fatima showed her where everything was, speaking in broken English mixed with Arabic, her gestures filling in where words failed. She pointed to a button on the wall, explained it would call her if Lila needed anything. Then she left, closing the door softly, and Lila was alone. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of what had happened. She'd left her home, her family, her entire life. She'd married a stranger. She was in a country where she didn't speak the language, in a house that felt like a museum, bound by a contract to play a role she didn't understand. The enormity of it crashed over her, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Lila cried. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that slid down her face as she sat in this beautiful room that felt like a prison. She cried for the life she'd lost, for the choices that had been taken from her, for the girl she'd been 3 weeks ago who'd believed she had control over her future. She cried until she had nothing left, until the tears stopped, and she was just empty, hollowed out, numb. Then she got up, washed her face, and unpacked her small suitcase, because crying didn't change anything. And if she was going to survive the next 2 years, she needed to stop grieving what she'd lost and start figuring out how to live with what she had. The next morning, Lila woke disoriented, not recognizing the room, the light, the sounds. Then memory returned, heavy and absolute, and she closed her eyes for a moment before forcing herself to get up. There was a soft knock on her door. Lila pulled on a robe and opened it to find Fatima with a tray. "Breakfast," the older woman said, smiling. "Sheikh says eat, then he show you house." The food was more elaborate than anything Lila usually ate. Fruit and pastries, eggs prepared in a way she didn't recognize, fresh juice, and strong coffee. She ate because it was easier than refusing, and when she was done, she dressed in simple clothes and ventured downstairs. Rashid was in what appeared to be his office, on a phone call in rapid Arabic. He saw her and held up a finger 1 minute. When he finished, he stood. "Good morning. Did you sleep?" "Not really," Lila said honestly. "But I survived. It's something." He studied her for a moment, and she saw what might have been sympathy in his eyes. "Come," he said. "Let me show you around." The house was even larger than she'd realized. Multiple living areas, a formal dining room, a library that made her heart ache with longing, a gym, even a small movie theater. The kitchen was professional grade, though Rashid admitted he rarely used it. "Fatima handles most meals," he said. "But if you like to cook, you're welcome to." The garden was surprisingly peaceful, with fountains and carefully maintained plants, places to sit in shade, a pool that gleamed turquoise in the morning sun. "This is your home now," Rashid said as they stood by the pool. "I want you to feel comfortable here, to use whatever you want, to make it yours in whatever way helps." "It's not my home," Lila said quietly. "It's your house. I'm just living in it." Rashid was quiet for a moment. "Fair enough," he said finally. "But perhaps over time that will change." Lila doubted it, but she didn't argue. "What happens now?" she asked. "What's expected of me?" "For the next few weeks, nothing," Rashid said. "You need time to adjust, to settle in, to learn your way around the city. Fatima can take you shopping if you need clothes more suitable for the climate. I've arranged for a driver who can take you wherever you want to go. Eventually, there will be social obligations, dinners, events, where I'll need you to appear as my wife. But not yet. Not until you're ready." "And how will I know when I'm ready?" Lila asked. "You'll tell me," he said simply. "I'm not going to force you into situations before you're prepared." Lila looked at him, this man who'd bought her, trying to understand him. He was being kind, considerate, giving her space and time. But underneath the courtesy, she could feel the fundamental imbalance. He had all the power. He'd paid for her presence, her compliance, her performance. No matter how gentle he was about it, she was still property. "Thank you," she said, because it seemed expected. "I think I'll explore the library, if that's all right." "Of course," Rashid said. "Everything here is yours to use." He hesitated, then added, "Lila, I know this is difficult. I know you didn't choose this and that I'm the symbol of everything that's been taken from you. But I meant what I said at the wedding. I'll try to make this as painless as possible." "Why?" Lila asked suddenly. "Why do you care if it's painful or not? You got what you wanted." Rashid's expression shifted, something dark and complicated crossing his face. "Because," he said quietly, "I'm not a monster, even if circumstances have forced me to act like one. And because perhaps I understand more than you think about feeling trapped by expectations, by duty, by choices that aren't really choices." Then he turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Lila standing in the garden, wondering if maybe they were both prisoners in this arrangement after all. The first month passed in a strange, suspended way, like living in a dream that never quite became real. Lila spent her days exploring the library, reading voraciously, anything to keep her mind occupied. She wandered through the house like a ghost, present but not participating. Rashid gave her space, kept his distance, their interactions limited to brief, polite exchanges at breakfast, or when he needed to inform her of something. It should have been what she wanted, this distance, this lack of demands. But somehow, it made everything worse, made her feel even more like a possession stored away until needed. Fatima tried to draw her out, bringing tea, suggesting shopping trips, inviting her to help in the kitchen. The older woman's kindness was genuine, uncomplicated, and gradually Lila found herself responding, accepting the tea, agreeing to small outings, learning a few phrases in Arabic. It was Fatima who first made her laugh, attempting to teach her a word, and getting so frustrated with Lila's pronunciation that she started making exaggerated faces. The sound of her own laughter startled Lila, made her realize how little joy she'd allowed herself. Maybe survival didn't have to mean complete numbness. Maybe she could find small moments of lightness even in this situation. The house began to feel slightly less foreign. She learned which windows caught the morning light, where to sit in the garden when the heat became too much, how to navigate the spaces without constantly feeling lost. It wasn't home, but it was becoming familiar. And familiarity, she discovered, was its own kind of comfort. 6 weeks after the wedding, Rashid knocked on her suite door in the evening. She opened it to find him dressed formally, looking uncomfortable. "I need to ask something of you," he said without preamble. "There's a dinner tomorrow night. Family and close associates. My grandmother will be there. She's been asking to meet you." Lila's stomach tightened. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading, the performance beginning. Do I have a choice? She asked. Rashid's jaw tightened. Technically, yes. But I'm asking you to do this. My grandmother, she's the reason I needed to marry. She's dying, Lila. And she wants to meet the woman she thinks I've fallen in love with. Guilt twisted in Lila's chest. How do I pretend to be in love with you when I barely know you? We don't have to pretend deep love, Rashid said. Just respect, affection, the beginnings of something. You're intelligent, perceptive. You can manage that. Lila wanted to refuse, wanted to make him understand how much he was asking. But she thought of the contract she'd signed, the money that had saved her family, the bargain she'd made. This was part of it, the price she'd agreed to pay. All right, she said. Tell me what you need me to do. Relief crossed Rashid's face. Thank you. I'll brief you on who'll be there, what to expect. And Lila, I know this is difficult, but I appreciate it. After he left, Lila stood looking at her reflection in the mirror, practicing smiles that didn't reach her eyes. The next evening, she dressed in a gown that had been selected by a stylist Rashid had hired, emerald green silk that made her skin glow. Fatima helped with her hair and makeup, transforming her into someone who looked like she belonged in this world of wealth and power. When Lila came downstairs, Rashid was waiting in the foyer. He looked at her, and something shifted in his expression, something she couldn't quite name. You look beautiful, he said, and it didn't sound like a polite lie. Thank you, Lila replied. You look nervous. I am, he admitted. My family, they're complicated. Just remember you're my wife. That gives you status, protection. No one will challenge you directly. They'll just judge silently, Lila said. That's so much better. Rashid's mouth quirked slightly. Your honesty is refreshing. Most people in my world have forgotten how. The dinner was at his grandmother's home, an older, more traditional estate, with elaborate architecture and gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Cars lined the drive, expensive models that gleamed under landscape lighting. Inside, the house was full of people, all elegantly dressed, all watching as Rashid entered with Lila on his arm. She felt their eyes, assessing, calculating, judging. Felt herself being measured against expectations she didn't understand. Rashid kept her close, his hand at her back, warm and steady. He introduced her to relatives, cousins, and aunts and uncles, whose names she immediately forgot, switching seamlessly between English and Arabic. Everyone was polite, but Lila could feel the curiosity beneath the courtesy, the questions they didn't ask. Then they were led to a private room where an elderly woman sat in a high-backed chair, dressed in traditional garments of exceptional quality, her face deeply lined, but her eyes sharp and knowing. Rashid's grandmother. Jada, Rashid said, his voice softening in a way Lila had never heard. I've brought Lila to meet you. The old woman studied Lila with an intensity that was almost physical, taking in every detail. Then she spoke in Arabic, her voice strong despite her frailty. She wants to know if you married him for money, Rashid translated quietly, or if there's something real between us. Lila felt panic rise. This woman would see through any lie. She could feel it. So, instead of lying, she chose a careful truth. Tell her, Lila said, still looking at the grandmother, that I married your grandson because my family needed help and he offered it. Tell her I won't insult her intelligence by pretending otherwise. But tell her also that I'm discovering he's a better man than I expected, and that perhaps something real could grow from honest beginnings. Rashid translated, and Lila saw surprise flicker across his face. The grandmother listened, then laughed, a dry, raspy sound. She spoke again, and Rashid's expression softened. She says you have courage and honesty, which is more than she expected. She says perhaps there's hope for me, yet if I was smart enough to choose a woman with a spine. Despite herself, Lila smiled. Tell her thank you, and that I hope I can make him worthy of that hope. The conversation continued, stilted, translated, but somehow real. The grandmother asked about her family, her education, her interests. Lila answered honestly, not trying to impress, just being herself. And slowly, she saw the old woman's severe expression soften, saw something that looked almost like approval. When they finally left the private room, Lila felt exhausted, but also strangely pleased. She'd survived the first test. Throughout dinner, Lila played her role, sitting beside Rashid at the long table, participating in conversations, laughing at appropriate moments, touching his arm occasionally in ways that suggested familiarity. It wasn't hard exactly. Rashid made it easier, staying close, including her naturally in discussions, occasionally translating when conversations shifted to Arabic. There was a moment when his cousin made a comment Rashid didn't translate, but Lila saw his jaw tighten, saw him respond with something sharp that made the cousin look away. What did he say? Lila asked quietly. Nothing important, Rashid said. Just ignorance. Tell me. Rashid hesitated. He suggested you looked like you were out of your depth, that Western women don't understand our ways, I corrected him. Lila felt a flash of gratitude mixed with something else, something warmer. Thank you for defending me. You're my wife, Rashid said simply. No one speaks disrespectfully about my wife. The possessiveness in his tone should have bothered her, but instead, Lila felt oddly protected, valued. It was confusing, this growing complexity of feelings toward a man who'd bought her. On the drive home, they were both quiet. Then Rashid said, You did well tonight. Better than well. My grandmother likes you, which is rare. She's intimidating, Lila said. But I liked her too. She's honest. Honesty seems to be something your family values, Rashid said, glancing at her. You could have lied to her, told her what she wanted to hear. I thought about it, Lila admitted, but she would have known. And I don't want to be someone who lies about everything just to make this easier, even if the truth is complicated. Even if the truth is complicated, Rashid repeated. He was quiet for a moment. Lila, what you said to her, about me being a better man than you expected, did you mean that? Lila considered lying, protecting herself. But the evening had exhausted her defenses. Yes, she said. You've been kind, respectful, giving me space when I needed it. You're not what I expected when I agreed to this arrangement. What did you expect? Rashid asked. Lila looked out at the city lights passing by. I expected someone cruel, someone who would use the power he had over me, someone who would make me feel small and powerless every day. You haven't done that, and I don't know what to do with that, with you not being the villain I need you to be, because it would be easier if you were. Rashid was silent for a long time. Then, quietly, I never wanted to be anyone's villain. But I understand why you see me that way. They didn't speak again until they reached home, but something had shifted between them. Some wall had developed a crack. After that night, things changed in subtle ways. Rashid began joining her for breakfast more regularly, asking about what she was reading, telling her about his work. The conversations were careful at first, polite, but gradually they deepened. Lila discovered he had strong opinions about art and architecture, that he'd studied at Oxford, that he felt as trapped by family expectations as she felt by circumstance. They were both prisoners of duty in different ways. She told him about her love of history, how she'd wanted to work in museum curation, how she'd dreamed of traveling through Europe studying art in person rather than from books. And Rashid listened, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. One morning, about 2 months after the dinner with his grandmother, Lila came downstairs to find Rashid waiting with an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it," he said, and there was something almost shy in his expression. Inside were tickets, no, passes, to a private exhibition at the Louvre Abu Dhabi, a collection of Renaissance art on loan from European museums, exactly the kind of thing she'd mentioned wanting to see. Lila looked up at him, speechless. "I thought you might enjoy it," Rashid said. "The museum opens early for private viewings. We could go this afternoon if you want." Before the crowds. "Why?" Lila asked, and her voice came out softer than intended. "Why would you do this?" "Because you're my wife," Rashid said, "and because I want you to have moments of happiness, even within the constraints of our arrangement." That afternoon, they walked through galleries together, and for the first time since arriving in Dubai, Lila felt like herself again. She talked about the paintings, explaining composition and historical context, her voice animated in ways it hadn't been in months. Rashid watched her more than the art, and when she caught him staring, he didn't look away. "You're different when you talk about this," he said. "Alive." "I forget sometimes," Lila admitted, looking at a Caravaggio. "I forget who I was before all this happened. But here, with these, I remember." "We should do this more often," Rashid said. "Help you remember." They had dinner that night in the museum restaurant, just the two of them, talking about art and history and ideas. It felt almost like a date, like something chosen rather than obligated. And when Rashid reached across the table and took her hand, Lila didn't pull away. "This is nice," she said quietly. "It is," he agreed. "Lila, I know I can't undo how this started. I know I can't change the fact that you're here because of money and debt and circumstances neither of us would have chosen. But I'd like to try to make it something more. Something better." "What does that mean?" Lila asked. "It means I'd like us to try to be friends, at least, to find common ground, to make these 2 years something other than endurance. And maybe," he hesitated, "maybe something more than friendship, if that develops naturally. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to want me. I'm just asking if we could try to build something real within the structure we've been given." Lila's heart was beating fast. It would be so easy to say no, to keep her walls up, to maintain the distance that protected her. But she was lonely, and he was kind. And maybe he was right. Maybe they could build something that made this bearable, even good. "I don't know if I can," she said honestly. "I don't know if I can separate what we are from how we started." "I understand," Rashid said. "But I'd like to try. Will you let me try?" Lila looked at their joined hands, his dark against her pale, warm and solid. "Yes," she said. "We can try." The trying manifested in small ways. Rashid started asking her opinion on things, genuinely interested in her thoughts. He invited her to his home office, showed her his work, explained the investments and projects he managed. Lila discovered he had a sharp mind, that he cared about doing good with his wealth, funding education initiatives, and supporting artisans. She began accompanying him to business dinners, not just as decoration but as a partner. Rashid introduced her that way, asked her questions that drew her into conversations, valued her input. Slowly, Lila felt herself gaining confidence, finding her voice in this new world. They started watching movies together in the evenings, sitting on the same couch with careful distance between them that gradually shrank. They cooked together sometimes, Rashid teaching her Middle Eastern dishes while she showed him recipes from her childhood. They laughed more, touched more casually, a hand on a shoulder, brushing past in doorways. Small moments of physical contact that felt natural rather than forced. 3 months into their marriage, Lila realized she was happy. Not just content or managing, but actually happy in moments. And that terrified her, because happiness meant vulnerability, meant caring, meant the power to be hurt. One evening, they were sitting in the garden under strings of lights, drinking wine and talking about nothing important, when Rashid said, "I need to tell you something." Lila's stomach tightened. "What is it?" "My grandmother is getting worse," he said quietly. "The doctors don't think she has much time left. She's asked to see us together again, wants to know that I'm happy, that this marriage is real. And I know that's asking a lot, to perform again. But I'd like you to come." "Of course," Lila said immediately. I liked her. "I want to say goodbye." Rashid looked at her with something intense in his eyes. It wouldn't be performing, though, would it? Not entirely. "We've become friends. These past months, they've been real." "Yes," Lila admitted. "They've been real." "So when we tell her we're happy," Rashid said carefully, "that wouldn't be a lie." "No," Lila said. "It wouldn't be a lie." Rashid reached over and took her hand, lifted it to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. "Thank you," he said, "for giving this a chance, for giving me a chance." They visited his grandmother the next day. The old woman was in bed now, frail but still sharp-eyed. She spoke in Arabic, and Rashid translated. She says she can see the difference, that we look at each other like people who matter to each other now. She's pleased. "Tell her I'm grateful for her wisdom," Lila said. "Tell her she was right, that honest beginnings could lead to real feelings." The grandmother smiled, squeezed Lila's hand with surprising strength. They stayed for hours, Lila sitting beside the bed, holding the old woman's hand, while Rashid talked with her in Arabic, his voice tender. When they finally left, Lila saw tears on Rashid's face. "She's the one who raised me," he said, "after my parents died. She's the only one who ever made me feel like I could be more than just duty and obligation." "I'm sorry," Lila said, taking his hand. "I'm so sorry." In the car, Rashid pulled her close, held her against his chest, his heart beating under her ear. "I don't want to lose her," he said. "I know," Lila whispered. "I know." That night, Rashid knocked on her sweet door. When she opened it, he said, "I don't want to be alone tonight. Can I stay with you? Just to sleep. Just to not be alone." Lila stepped back, letting him in. They lay together on top of the covers, fully clothed, just holding each other. And somewhere in the quiet darkness, Lila realized she'd stopped thinking of this as an arrangement. She'd started thinking of it as her life. And Rashid wasn't just the man who'd bought her anymore. He was becoming the man she was choosing. Rashid's grandmother died 2 weeks later, peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was large, elaborate, full of people paying respects to a woman who'd been a matriarch in every sense. Lila stood beside Rashid through all of it, his hand gripping hers with an intensity that spoke of how much he was holding back. She'd never seen him vulnerable like this, stripped of his usual composure. In the days after, he withdrew into himself, spending long hours in his office, barely eating, barely sleeping. Lila tried to give him space, but finally couldn't stand watching him suffer alone. She entered his office without knocking one evening to find him sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. "You need to eat," she said gently. "I brought food." "I'm not hungry," Rashid said, his voice hollow. Lila set the tray down and knelt in front of his chair. "Look at me," she said. When he did, she took his face in her hands. "You don't have to be strong right now. You don't have to hold it together. Not with me." Something broke in his expression. "She was all I had," he said, and his voice cracked. "Everyone else wants something from me, but she just loved me." "I know," Lila said, "and she'd want you to take care of yourself. She'd want you to let yourself grieve properly. Rashid pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and finally let himself cry. Lila held him through it, stroking his hair, murmuring comfort, being the anchor he needed. When he finally calmed, he pulled back just enough to look at her. "How did you become so important to me?" he asked. "I don't know," Lila said honestly. "But you've become important to me too." Rashid kissed her then, softly at first, asking permission. Lila kissed back, and it felt different from any kiss before. Felt like a choice rather than performance, like want rather than obligation. They made love that night, slow and tender, learning each other's bodies with reverence rather than urgency. It wasn't about the physical act. It was about comfort, about connection, about choosing to be vulnerable together. Afterward, lying tangled together, Rashid said, "I know this started wrong. I know I bought you, owned you in ways I shouldn't have. But Lila, what I feel now, it's not about the contract. It's not about obligation. I care about you, really care." "I know," Lila whispered. "I care about you too. That scares me." "Why?" Rashid asked, kissing her shoulder. "Because the contract ends," she said. "In less than 2 years, I'm supposed to walk away with my money and my freedom. And I don't know if I'll be able to." Rashid propped himself up on an elbow, looking down at her. "Then don't," he said simply. "Stay. Not because of the contract, not because of money. Stay because you want to. I can't think about that now," Lila said. "It's too much." Rashid nodded, pulling her close again. "Then don't think about it. Just be here now." And Lila let herself sink into his warmth, into the strange miracle of finding real feeling in a transaction that should have been empty. The months that followed were the happiest of Lila's life. She and Rashid became true partners, in public and in private. He asked her opinion on business decisions, valued her insight. She accompanied him on trips to London and Paris and New York, seeing the world she'd always dreamed of, but now with someone who made it meaningful. They made love regularly, and each time felt like a conversation, a deepening of understanding. They fought sometimes, real arguments about real things, but they learned to communicate, to work through conflicts rather than avoiding them. Lila's family visited, and seeing her father's face when he realized she was genuinely happy made something heal in both of them. "You love him," her father said, watching her with Rashid. "I didn't expect that." "Neither did I," Lila admitted. "But yes, I love him. And he loves you." "Yes," Lila said. And it felt true, real, unquestionable. "He loves me." 6 months before the contract was set to expire, Lila realized she was terrified, because the end was coming, and she'd have to make a choice. She could take the money, walk away with her freedom intact, prove that she'd never been truly bought. Or she could stay, choose the life she'd built with Rashid, risk that maybe this love was real and permanent. She didn't know what to do. Rashid sensed her anxiety. One evening, he found her in the library, staring at a book she wasn't reading. "Talk to me," he said, sitting beside her. "What's wrong?" "The contract," Lila said. "It's almost over." "I know," Rashid said quietly. "I've been thinking about it too." Lila looked at him. "What do you want?" Rashid took her hands. "I want you to stay. Not because of the contract, not because of any obligation. I want you to tear up the contract entirely, to choose to be my wife because you want to be, because you love me the way I love you. But I also want you to be free, truly free. So I'm going to give you something." He pulled out a folder, handed it to her. Lila opened it, confused. Inside were legal documents. "What is this?" she asked. "It's the settlement," Rashid said. 2 million euros, transferred to your name immediately. The Paris apartment, the deed in your name. You have complete financial independence now, regardless of what you choose. The contract is fulfilled, even though we have 6 months left. Lila's hands trembled. Why would you do this now? Because I don't want you to stay because you need to, Rashid said. I don't want you to feel obligated, or trapped, or bought. I want you to have absolute freedom to choose, and that means you need to know you can leave without losing anything. Tears filled Lila's eyes. You're giving me freedom to leave you. I'm giving you freedom to choose me, Rashid corrected gently. Really choose me, without any conditions, or obligations, or fears. And if you decide you want to leave, if you decide these 2 years were enough, and you want to build a life on your own terms, I'll understand. I'll be devastated, but I'll understand. Because you deserve that choice. Lila looked at the papers, at the proof of her independence, at everything she'd thought she wanted when this began. And then she looked at Rashid, at the man who'd started as her captor and become her partner, who'd given her freedom even though it might mean losing her. I don't know what to do, she whispered. Take your time, Rashid said. Go to Paris if you want. Spend time with your family. Figure out what you really want. I'll be here, whatever you decide. Lila did go to Paris, spent 2 weeks in the apartment that was now hers, wandering museums alone, sitting in cafes, trying to remember who she'd been before all this. She met with old friends, visited her favorite places, tested what it felt like to be truly independent, to belong only to herself. And every day, she missed Rashid. Not the life he'd given her, not the wealth or comfort or security. She missed him, his laugh, his hands, the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in the world. She missed their conversations, their quiet evenings, the way he challenged her and supported her and loved her without conditions. On the last day in Paris, Lila sat in front of the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, the painting she'd dreamed of seeing for years, and realized something. Freedom wasn't about being alone. Freedom was about having the power to choose. And she was choosing Rashid, not because she had to, because she wanted to. When Lila returned to Dubai, Rashid was waiting at the airport. He looked tired, anxious, like he'd barely slept the entire time she'd been gone. She walked up to him and said, "I'm home." "Home," Rashid repeated, and the hope in his voice was almost painful. "Yes," Lila said, "if you'll have me. Not because of any contract, not because of money or obligation. Because I choose you. I choose us. I choose this life we've built together." Rashid pulled her into his arms, holding her like he'd never let go. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Lila said, and it felt like the most honest thing she'd ever said. That night, Rashid proposed again. Not with a contract this time, but with a ring, a beautiful sapphire that reminded him of her eyes, getting down on one knee in their garden and asking if she would marry him properly. For real this time. For love. "Yes," Lila said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." They had a second wedding, small and intimate, just family and close friends. This time, when Lila walked down the aisle, she was walking toward a future she'd chosen, toward a man she loved without reservation. This time, when she said her vows, every word was true. Afterward, at the reception, Lila's father approached her. "I need to apologize," he said, "for what I did to you, for selling you, for taking away your choices." Lila took his hand. "You didn't take away my choices, Father. You gave me different ones. And yes, it was hard. Yes, I was angry. But I found something I never would have found otherwise. I found a man who loves me completely, who values me, who made me strong enough to choose him freely. I found myself. So thank you for saving the family and for accidentally giving me the greatest gift." Her father cried, and they held each other, healing old wounds. That night, alone with Rashid in their bedroom, Lila said, "Tell me the truth. Would you have let me go? If I'd decided to leave, would you really have let me walk away?" Rashid pulled her close. "Yes," he said. "It would have destroyed me. But yes, because I love you, Lila. And love means wanting the other person's happiness more than your own. If your happiness was somewhere else, I would have let you find it. But I would have spent the rest of my life missing you." "Good thing my happiness is right here then," Lila said, kissing him. Rashid smiled against her lips. "Yes. Very good thing." They made love that night with a freedom and joy that came from true choice, from real commitment. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Lila thought about how far they'd come. From a transaction to a partnership to a love that was stronger because of how it began, not in spite of it. The next year was full of joy and growth. Lila started working with local museums, using her education and passion to contribute to the arts community in Dubai. Rashid supported her completely, proud of her accomplishments, never diminishing her success. They traveled together, built a life that honored both their cultures, created a home that was truly theirs. And one evening, about 18 months after their real wedding, Lila told Rashid she was pregnant. He cried, overwhelmed with happiness, holding her gently like she was made of glass. "We made this," he said in wonder. "We made a life together." "Yes," Lila said, laughing. "We did. When their daughter was born, they named her Noor, which meant light, because she was the light that came from darkness, the joy born from pain, the proof that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the hardest beginnings." Years later, when Noor was old enough to understand, they told her the truth about how they met, how it started as an arrangement, how her mother had been bought to save her family, how it shouldn't have worked. "But it did," Lila said, holding Rashid's hand, "because we chose to make it work, because we chose each other every single day. And that's what love really is. Not how you start, but what you build together." "So if I was bought," Noor asked, her young face serious, "you're saying I'm the daughter of a transaction?" "You're the daughter of a choice," Rashid corrected gently. "The most important choice your mother and I ever made. To turn something transactional into something real, to transform purchase into partnership, obligation into love." Noor seemed satisfied with that. Lila watched her daughter run off to play and leaned into Rashid's warmth. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "How we started?" "Never," Rashid said firmly, "because it brought me to you. And I'd live through any amount of wrong beginnings if they led to this right ending." "Me too," Lila said. "Me too." And it was true, because she'd learned that sometimes freedom isn't about never being bound. It's about choosing your bonds, claiming them as your own, transforming them into something beautiful. She'd been sold to a sheikh to save her family. He'd looked at her and said no one else would touch her. And in that possessive claim, she'd somehow found liberation. Not because he owned her, but because he'd given her the power to own herself, to choose him freely, to build a love that was hers by right of decision rather than transaction. That was the real miracle. Not that they'd fallen in love despite how they began, but that they'd used how they began to build something stronger, something that honored both the pain of her sacrifice and the beauty of what came after. Looking back, Lila wouldn't change any of it, because every hard moment, every struggle, every tear she'd cried in that beautiful suite during her first nights in Dubai, All of it had led here, to a husband who loved her fiercely, to a daughter who was her joy, to a life she'd built with her own hands from materials that should have been worthless. She'd been sold, but in the end, she'd bought her own freedom. And then she'd freely given it away again, to a man who valued it enough to hand it back. That was love. Real, complicated, hard-won, beautiful love. And it was worth everything. The years continued to unfold with a richness Lila had never imagined possible. She and Rashid grew together rather than apart, learning to navigate not just the joys of their marriage, but also the challenges that came with blending cultures, managing expectations, and raising a daughter who belonged to two worlds. When Noor was 3, they had a son they named Kareem, and their family felt complete. The house that had once seemed like a museum, sterile and cold, became filled with life, children's laughter, toys scattered in corners, art projects taped to walls. Fatima, now older but still managing the household, doted on the children with a grandmother's affection. Lila's mother and brother visited regularly, and the relationships that had been strained by guilt and sacrifice healed over time. Her father passed away when Noor was 5, and though the grief was real, Lila was grateful they'd had years of peace between them, years where he could see she was truly happy. At his funeral, she told him goodbye with love rather than resentment. Rashid built his business into something that mattered, investments focused on education and sustainable development, and Leela worked alongside him in many of those initiatives. She curated a small museum focused on contemporary Middle Eastern art, something that brought her deep satisfaction. They were partners in every sense, challenging each other, supporting each other, building something larger than either of them alone. There were hard moments, of course, times when old patterns resurfaced, when Lila felt the ghost of powerlessness creep back in, when Rashid's traditional upbringing clashed with her more progressive views. But they'd learned to talk through conflicts, to respect each other's perspectives, to find compromise without either of them feeling diminished. One evening, when Noor was 12 and beginning to ask harder questions about the world, she came to Lila with a worried expression. "Mom," she said, "if you were bought, does that mean women can be bought? That we're things people can own?" Lila put down the book she'd been reading and pulled her daughter close. "No, sweetheart. Women aren't things. I was never a thing, even in that situation. I was a person making an impossible choice to save people I loved. And the man who bought my presence, he never owned me. He just provided the circumstances in which I could eventually own myself completely." "But it was wrong, right?" Noor pressed. "What his family did, making him think he needed a wife like that. What your father's situation forced you to do, it was wrong." "Yes," Lila said honestly. "It was wrong. The system that put my father in debt to dangerous people was wrong. The cultural pressure that made Rashid think he needed to marry to please his family was wrong. The fact that my gender made me the one sacrificed was wrong. But then, how can you say it was worth it?" Noor asked, confused. "If it was all so wrong." "Because sometimes," Lila said carefully, "we find ourselves in wrong situations, and we still have to make choices. And I chose to see the person behind the transaction, to build something meaningful from broken pieces. That doesn't make the original situation right, but it means something good can come from hard beginnings. Your father and I, we transformed something transactional into something sacred. That's not erasing the wrong, it's transcending it." Noor considered this seriously. "So I should never let anyone buy me. But if I'm ever in an impossible situation, I should try to find the humanity in it." "Yes," Lila said. "And also," she added with a smile, "you should never be in that situation, Because your father and I are making sure you have every advantage, every choice, every opportunity we can give you. You'll never have to choose between your dignity and your family's survival, because we're breaking that cycle. That's our gift to you. Freedom. Real freedom. Later, Lila told Rashid about the conversation. He was quiet for a long time. "Do you think she judges us?" he asked, "for how we started?" "I think she's trying to understand," Lila said, "and that's healthy. We shouldn't want our children to accept injustice just because it worked out for us. We should want them to demand better." Rashid pulled her close. "You're an extraordinary woman. You know that. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and made it into the foundation of something beautiful." "I had help," Lila said, kissing his jaw. "You could have been terrible. You chose to be decent instead." "We both chose," Rashid said. "That's what made it work. The choosing." As Lila looked around their home that evening, seeing the life they'd built together, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Not for the circumstances that had brought them together, but for the choices they'd made afterward. The choice to see each other as people rather than roles. The choice to build trust from transaction. The choice to love when they could have settled for tolerance. She thought about the girl she'd been at 24, sitting in that hotel room, agreeing to sell herself to save her family. If she could go back and tell that girl anything, what would she say? That it would be okay. That the man waiting for her would be kind. That she would survive and eventually thrive. That the cage she feared would become a home she chose. But also she would tell that girl to hold on to her anger, her sense of injustice, her refusal to accept that what was happening was right. Because that fire, that resistance, that core of self that refused to be truly owned, that was what would eventually set her free. You don't heal from trauma by pretending it wasn't traumatic. You heal by acknowledging the wound, treating it with care, and then building something new from the scar tissue. Stronger than before, not in spite of the damage, but because you learned how to mend yourself. That's what she and Rashid had done. They'd mended each other, and in doing so, they'd created something that honored both the pain of their beginning and the beauty of their choosing. One night, many years into their marriage, Rashid woke to find Lila standing at the window, looking out at the city lights. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, coming to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm thinking about that first night," Lila said, "when I arrived here and cried in that bedroom, feeling like my life was over. And I'm thinking about how wrong I was. My life wasn't ending. It was just beginning in a way I couldn't imagine." Rashid rested his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever wish it had been different? That we'd met another way?" "Sometimes," Lila admitted. "I wish you hadn't had to buy me. I wish I hadn't had to be sold. I wish we'd found each other through choice from the beginning." But then she turned in his arms, looking up at him. "But I also think maybe we wouldn't have worked if we'd met differently. Maybe we needed to start from that broken place, to build something unbreakable. Maybe we needed to choose each other from positions of no power to understand what it really means to choose freely." "That's an interesting way to look at it," Rashid said. "You've always been able to find meaning in pain." "Not just meaning," Lila said. "Truth. The truth is that love isn't about perfect beginnings or fairy tale meetings. It's about what you build from whatever materials you're given. We were given a transaction. We built a cathedral." Rashid kissed her then, deep and loving. "I love you, Lila al-Zahrani. I have loved you from the moment you looked at me in that hotel room with fire in your eyes, refusing to pretend everything was okay. I love you for your honesty, your strength, your refusal to be diminished even when circumstances tried to make you small." "I love you," Lila said back, "and I choose you every day, every moment, I choose you. As they returned to bed, holding each other in the darkness, Lila thought about the title of her story, if it were to be told. Sold to the Sheikh to save her family. He looked at her once and said, "No one else will touch you." Yes, that's what happened. But the real story was what came after that moment. The real story was two people deciding that possession could become partnership, that purchase could transform into choice, that a contract could evolve into a covenant. The real story was about reclaiming power in powerlessness, finding freedom in constraint, and discovering that sometimes the cage you're locked in has a door you didn't notice, and the key has been in your hand all along. You just had to be brave enough to use it. And she had been. They both had been. Brave enough to look at something wrong and make it right. Brave enough to start from inequality and build toward balance. Brave enough to take a transaction and transform it into the truest love either of them had known. That was their story. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth it. Not what either of them would have chosen, but ultimately the best thing that ever happened to them, because they'd chosen it. In the end, that was all that mattered. The choosing.